I'd like to focus on PA public land bucks again. I've talked about Pennsylvania public land bucks in the past. I'd like to talk about them again because a couple reasons. The biggest reason is we're losing hunters. That's just not my opinion. Statistics show we're losing hunters. And we have such wonderful resources here in the state of Pennsylvania, and not just in the state of Pennsylvania, but in other states as well. A vast amount of public land, vast amount of public resources, and we've got to be aware of it. We've got to utilize it because, you know, sometimes you lose things and you don't realize how good you have it until you lost it. And one of the fears that I have is that, one, we won't expand public lands. There needs to be money to purchase land that's available. And if you don't have people participating in recreation, if you don't have people hunting, if you don't have people fishing, those dollars aren't there to enhance habitat, to conserve habitat, or to purchase lands to protect habitat. You know, putting those lands purchased by whether it be the state game lands or conservancy groups or federal properties as well. So it's very important to me. So I want to talk about how Pennsylvania has changed. And it's changed a lot in my lifetime. I'm 39 years old. I can remember back to the 1980s and how hunting was in Pennsylvania. There are a large amount of hunters. And there's still a large tradition in Pennsylvania, but it's not what it once was. And largely because we lost a lot of hunters. And that's startling. But there's positives to that as well. Just like in some other states, we have less hunters. That means less deer being harvested. That means a little less pressure. That means bigger bucks. And a lot of states are producing larger bucks than ever before. Pennsylvania is starting to fall into that category. And folks might get a little upset with me. Hunters might get upset with me. But there's a lot of private land in Pennsylvania. And, you know, I'm not telling people to go out on private land. I'm telling people that you can access public land, and there are places where your average ordinary fellow isn't going to go. Those are the types of places that I'm talking about. Those are the types of places I'm hoping that you'll consider, because you can have a great time and experience great things. One of the great things is experiencing a hunt or harvesting a large buck. And you can do it similarly to what you do on your private land. 3 points up here. First one, do large bucks exist on public land? I've already said that. I've talked about that in other videos, and I'm going to display some examples of that here in a minute or so. But yes, large bucks exist in Pennsylvania. Are they 200 class bucks? In some cases, there probably are a lot of bucks in certain regions that probably fall into a category over 160. Whether they're 200 or not, maybe not. But they're Boone and Crockett bucks in Pennsylvania. So large bucks do exist in the state of Pennsylvania. The second thing I want to talk about is how to scout public land and couple that with how to hunt PA public land. I'm going to go through a little map, give you a little example of places that I've hunted where I've seen large bucks. Alright, here are some examples that I'd like to show of some Pennsylvania big bucks. This buck was harvested this past fall, 2019. It was harvested on public land. Turns out to be a 10 point. Has about an 18.5-inch spread. This is another buck, probably a 2-year-old buck. Looks like it has some potential. It's also on public land, and this is a picture from this past fall. Here's another buck that was harvested not on public land, but on private land that's accessible to the public, or a cooperative. Okay, so you could kind of consider it public because there, you know, not a large amount of people hunting the land, but it is in a cooperative with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. This buck was harvested. It scored about 130, 125, Pope and Young. There's another public land buck in Velvet from a couple years ago. There's another look at it. Public land again. Here's a another large buck that's on public access property. And that's a nice 10 point. I'd say this deer is at least 4.5, if not 5. You can see it has that nice sag in the belly. It's a beautiful picture. Here's another public access buck, taken from, I think it's several years ago, 5-6 years ago. Public access property. Reclaimed mine. I had a video on reclaimed mines. This is actually a reclaimed mine. And here's a mountain buck from a few years ago, trail camera photo. This is on and around public land. Highly pressured land right here. Here's another public land buck. State Game Lands buck. And these two buck, one's in velvet, and one's obviously, this is, I think the one on the right's October, but it's also a wide rack buck. All public land. Yet another public land buck. This looks like a 10 point. Nice high rack. You can see how it dwarfs its ears. It's a really nice framed rack. This is another picture of a public access buck. And then this one's for this past year. This buck, you can see that it has a, if you look at its right, well, its left side, looking to the right side of the picture, it has a split main beam. 2 main beams that come up from the base. Pretty cool buck. Public land buck. Okay, second thing I'd like to talk about is how to scout PA public land. Now, I was on a scouting trip a few days ago, scouting state game lands, and I walked in over 2 miles, and it was uphill, and I had to get to this mountaintop. Nice mountaintop flat. That's one type of feature that I look for. Mountaintop flats. The deer like to be up there, and they like to get down and draw sometimes, but if there's cover on those mountaintop flats, you've got good browse, you'll probably find deer if it's a large mountaintop flat, because the winds are a little more stable on top. You don't get as much swirling. Still some swirling, but you don't get as much. But if you have that browse, and if you have some other features, for instance, the land that I was hunting, there's an actual food plot. It's 2-3 acres near that mountaintop flat. And remember, the shortest way into this mountaintop flat is at least a mile. Okay? But you'd have to walk through that food plot. So I'm going to have to walk over 2 miles to get to this mountaintop flat. And I think there's great potential. I think there's great potential for that mountaintop flat. So look for features where it's hard to get to, where you're not going to be able to get to it. Besides mountaintop flats, I also look for a lot of clear cuts and cover. I've mentioned this before in other videos. Clear cuts, there's browse available, especially if it's surrounded by large amounts of large hardwood trees where there's not as much browse. Deer need to browse. Majority of their diets in those big wood settings will be browse. So I look for clear cuts, and I tend to do pretty well with that. And another way I scout, once I find these features, high mountaintop flats that have cover and browse, and the clear cuts, whether they be on a mountaintop or somewhere on a bottom or in a draw or something, I start putting out game cameras. I was thinking a few days ago when I was scouting, some locations I marked. I was thinking about locations that I could mark potentially, and I marked them on my map. And I'm going to go back probably end of June, early July. Should have some bucks in pretty good velvet, just to see what I can find. But I have a good feeling that I'm going to have to run the trail camera probably all the way through the end of fall into early winter in order to see what's out there. And I don't even know, I might find a buck that's in that habitat early on, and I might be able to hunt that buck sometime early October, and that's what I'm looking for. If I can find a buck that's showing up on camera all the time through September and going into October, I'm going to hunt him. If there's a lot of acorns in that area, and you know, I have frequent visits like I did on one of the bucks last year on that public land that I didn't really even hunt that much, but he was there. I could have probably caught him early on in the season. That's what I'm looking for. I have other places that I'm going to focus on late October into November, but these big areas with these big open woods and these public lands, I feel like I can maybe have success early on. And so I put out game cameras. I'm going to put out the trail cameras in end of June, early July, and focus on high frequency in areas where I see the bucks reoccurring. If I'm lucky enough to find something like that, that's what I'll focus on early part of archery season. So trail cameras is probably key to scouting, because you can't always walk in 2-3 miles and monitor everything. Put those things out, let them sit, and you know, it could be like Christmas morning when you go out to check those cameras and find that you have a buck that's been coming regularly. Okay. Besides that, the scouting, how do you hunt the PA public land? Well, pretty much the same way you scout it. Right? You've got those cameras out there. You're looking for sign. You put cameras out. You get photographs. You get high frequency photographs. You focus on that. And one of the ways that I like to hunt is the same way I post the cameras. And here's an actual little drawing I did of a place that I've hunted where one of the bucks that I showed you with the split main beam was hanging out early season. Didn't see him much after that. I let those cameras go all the way until November. It was pretty much September through early October that I spotted that deer. And I think I could have had a chance at it. But there were a lot of bucks coming through this area. You have a little draw here. Just, it's not a real deep draw, it's just a natural depression. What I did was I triangulated. I like to call it triangulating. I put 3 cameras in there in areas. There's heavy travel through here, had a camera. And then there's heavy travel along the edge of this side of the cover, I had a camera. And then the other edge of the cover, there was an old logging road here, and I had a camera. And I saw bucks, some of the same bucks, traveling, appearing on 3 different cameras. So that gave me a pretty good idea that that buck's really living in that area. Whereas this area here, I had a mock scrape, and I really got a lot of bucks moving through it. So this seemed to me to be a hub where deer were moving and crossing through on a regular basis. So PA public land bucks, big ones exist. Large bucks do exist. Key to finding them, you have to get out, you have to walk long, you have to walk far, and sometimes you have to walk into rough terrain, because the big ones, they're not going to hang out by the parking lot in a lot of cases. Too much pressure, you've got to go where least amount of pressure is. If you have least pressure, if you have food, you have cover, there's a good chance you'll have success. How to scout and hunt. Triangulate those cameras, look for high frequency areas, reoccurring photos of bucks, and I think you'll have a lot of success hunting PA public land bucks.